It was a quiet morning when an elderly man stepped off the bus and slowly made his way down the small town street. The air was cool and the sun had just begun to rise above the rooftops. He walked with a cane in one hand and carried a small leather bag in the other. His clothes were neat, pressed and clean, though they had clearly been worn many times. He had the look of someone who had lived through a lot, but still carried himself with quiet pride. He had come to this town for one reason: to see his son, who had just returned from serving overseas. It had been more than 2 years since they'd last seen each other, and this reunion meant the world to him. He had raised his son alone after losing his wife many years ago, and even though life had been hard, he had always taught his boy to stand tall, work hard, and serve others before himself. The old man had once been a soldier too, many years ago. He didn't talk much about it, not because he was ashamed, but because he never wanted people to treat him differently. The medals, the stories, the long nights in distant places, he kept those memories tucked away like old photographs. To most people, he was just another quiet old man. As he reached the corner of Main Street, he saw a small diner with a glowing sign that said, "Home Kitchen." The smell of fresh coffee and warm bread drifted through the door each time someone walked in or out. He decided to stop there for breakfast before heading to the small base where his son was expected to arrive later that morning. When he entered the diner, the bell above the door gave a soft ring. Every head turned for a second, then went back to their own conversations. The place was busy. Families eating pancakes, workers grabbing coffee before heading to their jobs, and a few teenagers sitting by the window laughing loudly. The old man found an empty seat near the counter and carefully lowered himself onto the stool. A young waiter walked over, chewing gum and looking half awake. "What can I get you?" he asked flatly without making eye contact. The old man smiled politely. "Just a cup of coffee, please. Maybe some toast if you have it." The waiter nodded, still looking at his phone, and walked away. The old man looked around the diner. The chatter and laughter filled the room, but somehow he still felt alone. He didn't mind it, though. He'd spent plenty of quiet mornings like this in his life, waiting, remembering and being grateful for what he still had. After a few minutes, the waiter placed a cup of coffee in front of him with a dull thud, spilling a bit on the counter. "There you go," he said carelessly. The old man smiled again. "Thank you, son." But the waiter didn't reply. He just walked away, shaking his head slightly. A few people nearby noticed the way the old man had been treated, but no one said anything. The man simply took a napkin, wiped the spilled coffee, and began stirring his cup gently. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded photograph. It was worn around the edges like it had been handled many times. In the picture, he stood beside a young man in uniform, his son, both of them smiling proudly. He stared at the picture for a while, his eyes softening. Today, he thought, he would finally get to see that smile again in person. A group of young men entered the diner, laughing loudly as they took a booth near the counter. They noticed the old man sitting alone and started whispering to each other. One of them chuckled. "Look at him, all serious. Must think he owns the place," another one added. "He looks like he walked straight out of a war movie." They laughed quietly, not realizing that the man they were mocking had indeed once fought in a war. The old man didn't react. He had heard worse before. Years of discipline had taught him that silence was sometimes stronger than words. He simply took a sip of his coffee and kept his eyes on the photograph. When the waiter came back, he seemed a little annoyed. "You gonna order anything else, or is that it?" he asked, tapping his notepad impatiently. "That'll be all for now," the man replied kindly. "I'm just waiting for someone." "All right, but you can't sit here too long if you're not eating," the waiter muttered under his breath. The old man nodded slowly, pretending he hadn't heard the comment. He didn't want trouble. All he wanted was to have a quiet cup of coffee before the happiest moment of his life, seeing his son again after 2 long years. As he sat there, a young woman with her little daughter entered the diner and took a seat beside him at the counter. The little girl smiled at him and waved shyly. He smiled back and said softly, "Good morning, young lady." The girl giggled, and her mother smiled too, sensing the kindness in his voice. The waiter came over to take their order and, in a noticeably nicer tone, asked the woman what she wanted. The difference in attitude was clear. The old man noticed but didn't say anything. Instead, he looked out the window, watching cars pass and people rushing about their day. The clock on the wall showed 9:15 a.m. His son's bus was expected to arrive around 10. He couldn't wait. He pictured the moment, the hug, the tears, the pride. That image alone kept his heart warm despite the cold treatment he'd received. After a few minutes, one of the young men from the booth called out loudly to the waiter, "Hey, did the old man finally get his breakfast? Or is he just nursing that one cup?" Laughter filled the booth again. A few heads turned, but no one spoke up. The old man lowered his eyes and took another slow sip. He could feel the sting of embarrassment, but he held it in. He had seen real hardship in his life, hunger, loss, and war. A few rude words couldn't shake him. Still, a small part of him felt sad, not for himself, but for how easily people forget what respect means. At that moment, the door of the diner opened again, and the bell rang softly. The old man didn't look up right away, but a voice from the entrance caught his attention. "Excuse me," the voice said politely to the waiter. "Have you seen an older gentleman come in this morning? He'd be carrying a brown bag and using a cane." The old man slowly turned his head. Standing at the door in a crisp military uniform was his son. For the first time that morning, a genuine smile spread across the old man's face. The entire diner went quiet for a second, realizing who the man must be. The rude waiter froze. The young men in the booth stopped laughing. Everyone watched as the soldier took off his cap, walked straight to his father, and wrapped his arms around him. The old man closed his eyes for a moment, holding on tightly. "Good to see you, son," he whispered. "You too, Dad," his son replied softly. The room fell silent again, but this time, it wasn't awkward. It was out of respect. None of them knew what was coming next, but that moment of reunion would soon become something no one in that diner would ever forget. The diner had gone completely quiet when the young soldier hugged his father. The people who had been laughing earlier now sat still, unsure of what to say or do. Even the waiter looked frozen behind the counter. The soldier helped his father sit comfortably and placed his bag beside him. Then he turned to the waiter with a polite smile. "Can I get some breakfast for both of us, please?" he asked kindly. The waiter blinked, clearly nervous now. "Yeah, of course. What would you like?" The soldier smiled again, still calm. "Just some eggs, toast, and 2 coffees. "Thank you." As the waiter hurried away, the soldier sat down beside his father and said softly, "I didn't know you'd come this early, Dad. I was going to meet you at the station." The old man smiled. "I wanted to surprise you. I thought I'd grab a cup of coffee before you arrived. Guess I was a little early." His son laughed lightly. "You never change. Still can't sit still, huh?" The old man chuckled, but behind his gentle smile was a quiet pain that his son noticed. He could see it in his father's eyes. Something had happened. The soldier didn't say anything right away, but he could sense the tension in the air. People were looking their way, whispering softly, and a few faces looked guilty. A few minutes later, the waiter returned with their food, this time placing everything carefully on the table. "Here you go, sir," he said in a tone completely different from before. "Thank you," the soldier said politely. He could tell the waiter was uneasy. He looked around and noticed the group of young men at the corner booth trying not to make eye contact. Something about their quietness told him the story. He turned back to his father. "Dad, did someone say something to you before I came?" The old man took a sip of his coffee and shook his head. "It's nothing, son. Just a few kids talking too much. You know how it is." The soldier frowned slightly. "Did they disrespect you?" The old man smiled weakly. "I've faced worse, son. It's not worth making a fuss about." But the son didn't look convinced. His hands rested on the table, calm but firm. He had been trained to read situations, and this one spoke louder than words. The way people avoided looking at them, the nervous waiter, the guilty faces, it all told him enough. Still, he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he leaned closer to his father and said quietly, "You've been through too much to be treated like that. People forget too easily what men like you have done for this country." His father smiled gently. "And if we reminded them every time, we'd never stop talking, would we?" They both laughed softly, trying to push the tension away. But the truth hung in the air like an unspoken weight. At the next table, a man who had been reading his newspaper put it down and cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said to the old man. "I couldn't help overhearing. Are you both military?" The old man nodded humbly. "We are, or rather I was. My son's still serving. The man nodded with respect. Thank you for your service, both of you. My brother's a Marine. I know the kind of sacrifice that takes. The soldier smiled. That means a lot, sir. Thank you. The small conversation seemed to ease the tension for a moment. A few others nearby looked up and some even smiled, realizing who the old man was. But not everyone felt that way. The group of young men in the corner whispered again, one of them muttering just loud enough for others to hear. Man, they act like they're heroes or something. The soldier heard it, so did the waiter, who froze mid-step. The soldier didn't turn around right away. He simply looked at his father, who was staring down at his plate, pretending not to hear. That quiet pain returned to his eyes, and the son couldn't stand it anymore. He stood up slowly, not with anger, but with calm authority. The entire diner grew silent again. He turned toward the group and said in a steady voice, "You know, my father doesn't talk about what he's been through. He doesn't brag. He doesn't want attention. But maybe he should." The young men shifted uncomfortably, not sure how to respond. The soldier continued, "When he was your age, he was halfway across the world carrying wounded soldiers out of fire zones. He didn't sleep for days. He didn't eat right. He came home with scars, not the kind you see, but the kind that stay forever. And yet he never complained. He never asked for anything. So when you laugh at him, you're not laughing at some old man. You're laughing at every person who ever stood between you and danger." The diner was completely still. You could hear the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the quiet drip of coffee being poured behind the counter. The soldier's voice wasn't loud or angry. It was calm, measured, and honest, and that made it even more powerful. The young men looked down, ashamed. One of them mumbled, "We didn't mean anything by it." The soldier nodded. "Maybe not. But words matter, and sometimes respect isn't about what you mean. It's about what you show." He turned back to his father, who was now looking up at him with pride and a hint of tears in his eyes. "Sit down, son," he said softly. "You've said enough." The soldier nodded and sat beside him again. The silence in the diner wasn't awkward anymore. It was thoughtful. People were looking at the old man differently now, some with guilt, some with admiration. The waiter quietly refilled their cups without being asked, and this time his hands didn't shake. After a moment, the old man said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," the soldier replied. "But I wanted to." The old man smiled faintly. "You've always had your mother's heart." They sat quietly for a while, eating in peace. The people who had once stared now turned away, but this time out of respect, not judgment. The atmosphere in the diner had completely changed. Softer, calmer, almost reverent. Before leaving, the soldier placed a few bills on the table and said to the waiter, "Keep the change, and treat your elders better next time, all right?" The waiter nodded quickly. "Yes, sir, I will." As they stood to leave, the soldier helped his father with his cane. The same people who had laughed earlier now watched them in silence, not knowing what to say. The old man nodded politely to them as if to say there were no hard feelings. As they reached the door, the little girl who had smiled at the old man earlier waved again. "Bye, mister," she said cheerfully. He smiled and waved back. "Goodbye, sweetheart." The soldier opened the door for his father, and together they stepped out into the bright sunlight. The bell above the door chimed one last time as it closed behind them. The laughter, the whispers, the disrespect, all of it was left behind in that small diner. What the people inside didn't know was that this moment, this quiet act of courage and respect, would soon be remembered far beyond those four walls. The sunlight felt warm as the soldier and his father stepped outside the diner. The street was calm, a few cars passing by, people walking their dogs, and shopkeepers opening their stores. The old man took a deep breath, as if letting go of everything that had happened inside. His son walked beside him, steady and protective, but quiet. They didn't speak for a few minutes. They just walked slowly down the street, the old man leaning a little on his cane, the younger man matching his pace patiently. The sound of their footsteps and the soft rustle of leaves filled the air between them. Finally, the old man broke the silence. "You shouldn't have said anything back there," he said softly. The soldier looked at him. "I know, Dad, but I couldn't just sit there and pretend I didn't hear them." "I know," his father replied with a small smile. "But I've learned that sometimes silence speaks louder than any words." The son nodded slowly. "Maybe so. But sometimes words can wake people up too. They walked a little farther until they reached a park near the bus stop. There was an empty bench under a large tree, and the old man sat down carefully. His son sat beside him. For a while, neither of them spoke. They just watched people passing by, children chasing each other, a man feeding birds, an older couple walking hand in hand. The old man looked at them and said quietly, "You know, when I was younger, I never imagined people would forget what sacrifice means. I don't blame them, though. Life moves fast. People get caught up in their own problems." The soldier nodded. "Maybe, but that doesn't make it right to treat others badly. You've spent your life serving others, Dad. You've earned respect, and whether people give it or not." The old man chuckled softly. "You sound just like your mother," he said. "She always wanted you to stand up for what's right. Guess she'd be proud of you today." The soldier smiled faintly. "I just hope I made her proud. And you too." "You already have," his father replied, his eyes soft with pride. They sat quietly for a while longer. The bus station was only a short walk away, but neither of them was in a hurry. It was one of those rare mornings where time seemed to slow down, letting them just be together after so long apart. Meanwhile, back at the diner, the air still felt heavy. The waiter was unusually quiet, and even the group of young men who had laughed earlier were staring at their untouched plates. A woman sitting near the window finally spoke. "That man, he handled it better than any of us would have," she said. Another customer nodded. You could tell his son respected him deeply. "I wish more people did that these days." One of the young men at the booth sighed and said quietly, "We really messed up, didn't we?" His friend nodded, regret on his face. "Yeah, I didn't think before talking. Guess we don't really understand what some people have been through." The waiter leaned against the counter, thinking about how he had acted. He felt a knot in his chest. He hadn't meant to be rude, but he'd been tired, distracted, impatient, and that had led him to treat someone with disrespect who had done nothing wrong. The realization made him feel small. By noon, the diner had calmed down completely. A few of the customers who had witnessed what happened told the manager about it. The manager, an older man with kind eyes, frowned deeply when he heard the story. "He was a veteran?" the manager asked. The waiter nodded. "And his son's in the service, too," he added quietly. The manager shook his head. "That's not how we treat people around here. Not under my roof." He grabbed his coat and said, "If you remember where they went, I'd like to apologize myself." The waiter told him they had walked toward the park. The manager left immediately, his face full of concern. Back at the park, the soldier and his father were still sitting on the bench talking about old times. The old man told stories from his service, stories his son had never heard before. Not about battles or medals, but about the people he had met. About a friend who used to play guitar every evening, and another who sent letters home to a little sister every week. The soldier listened quietly, realizing how much his father had carried all these years without ever talking about it. When the manager reached the park, he spotted them and approached slowly. "Excuse me," he said, his voice humble. "I don't mean to interrupt." The old man looked up, surprised. "Can I help you, son?" The manager took off his cap. "I'm the owner of the diner you were in earlier. I just heard what happened, and I wanted to apologize personally. That shouldn't have happened. Not in my place," the old man smiled gently. "It's all right. No harm done." But the manager shook his head. "No, sir. It's not all right. You deserved respect and you didn't get it. I'd like to make it right somehow." The soldier spoke softly. "You're doing that already, sir. Coming here says more than words ever could." The manager nodded, grateful for the soldier's understanding. "Thank you," he said quietly. "And thank you both for your service. This town's lucky to have men like you." After the manager left, the old man leaned back on the bench and looked at his son. "See, kindness still exists. Sometimes it just needs a reminder." The soldier smiled. "You gave them that reminder, Dad, not me." The old man chuckled. "Maybe a little of both." A few hours later, they finally made their way to the base where the soldier had been stationed. The gates were busy. Families hugging their loved ones, children waving flags, people holding welcome home signs. The old man stood quietly, taking it all in, his eyes shining with pride. As his son checked in with his commanding officer, a woman approached the old man and said softly, "Were you at the diner this morning?" He looked surprised. "Yes, I was." "How did you know?" "I saw the video," she said. "Someone recorded part of it. Your son's speech. It's already being shared online. People are talking about Ho. The old man's eyebrows lifted in surprise. Video? I didn't even notice anyone recording. The woman smiled. It's spreading fast. People are calling it the soldier's lesson in respect. The old man didn't know what to say. He looked toward his son, who was shaking hands with his fellow soldiers, unaware of the small storm his words had started. By evening, when they finally reached home, the old man turned on the TV and saw a local news segment. The reporter was talking about a heartfelt moment between a veteran and his son that had inspired viewers all over the country. The video showed a short clip of his son standing tall in the diner, speaking calmly but firmly, reminding everyone what respect truly meant. The old man looked at the screen for a long time, then turned to his son. Well, he said softly, looks like your words traveled farther than that diner. The soldier smiled. I didn't plan that, Dad. I just spoke from the heart. The old man nodded slowly. And that's exactly why it mattered. Outside their window, the evening sky turned golden. The world was quiet again, but something had changed. Not just in that small town, but in the hearts of everyone who had seen what happened that morning. It wasn't just a story about disrespect anymore. It had become a story about dignity, patience, and the quiet strength of those who choose kindness even when others don't. The next morning, the town woke up to a story that no one had expected to see everywhere. The video from the diner had spread overnight, reaching thousands of people across social media. It wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was just a short clip, a soldier speaking calmly in a small diner, standing beside his elderly father. But it carried something powerful that touched everyone who watched it. In the video, his words were clear and steady. This man right here is the reason I serve. He's the reason any of us have the freedom to sit here and live in peace. Those few lines hit people right in the heart. Viewers said it reminded them of their own parents, grandparents, or loved ones who had quietly sacrificed so much without ever asking for recognition. By noon, local news channels began running the story. One headline read, "A son's words remind a town of forgotten respect." Reporters tried to find the two men, but they were already on their way to a small veterans ceremony scheduled that day. At the ceremony, dozens of people had gathered, old veterans wearing their medals, families waving small flags, and young cadets standing in neat lines. The soldier helped his father to a seat near the front, unaware that many of the people there already knew who they were from the video. When the event began, one of the organizers walked up to the microphone and said, "Before we start, I want to acknowledge something special that happened right here in our town yesterday, a moment that reminded us what true respect looks like." He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes landed on the old man and his son. "Sir, I believe you and your boy were at the diner yesterday morning." The old man looked surprised. "Yes, we were," he said quietly. The crowd began to clap softly at first, then louder. The old man looked around, unsure of what to do. He wasn't used to attention. His son smiled at him, patting his shoulder gently. The organizer continued, "That video went around the country overnight. People are talking about it everywhere. You reminded us that respect isn't just about words. It's about how we treat people, especially those who've given so much." The applause grew louder. Some of the veterans in the crowd stood up and saluted the old man. His eyes filled with tears as he looked around at the faces smiling back at him. He leaned toward his son and whispered, "I didn't do anything special." His son replied softly, "You lived with honor, Dad. That's more than special." After the ceremony, several people came to shake his hand. Other veterans, young students, even strangers who had driven from nearby towns just to meet him. A young boy wearing a scout uniform approached him shyly and said, "Sir, I want to be a soldier someday, just like you and your son." The old man smiled, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "Then promise me one thing. Serve with kindness. The uniform means nothing if the heart isn't good." The boy nodded seriously, and his parents smiled proudly behind him. Later that afternoon, as they walked home, the soldier turned to his father and said, "I think people needed to hear that message. Maybe that moment at the diner happened for a reason." His father chuckled softly. "You think everything happens for a reason, don't you?" "Maybe not everything," the soldier said, smiling. "But this one sure feels like it." Back in town, the diner had turned into a place people were suddenly talking about. The manager, who had gone to apologize the day before, decided to take things a step further. He hung a small sign near the entrance that read, "Respect is served here and for everyone." He also placed a framed photo of the old man and his son, taken from the video near the counter. Below it, he added a short quote from the soldier's speech. "Respect isn't demanded. It's shown through how we treat others." When customers came in, they noticed it immediately. Some nodded quietly. Others smiled. It changed the whole feeling of the place. Even the young waiter who had been rude that morning had changed. He now greeted every customer with genuine kindness, especially the older ones. He had learned something that no training could ever teach him, the power of humility and respect. One afternoon, he spotted the soldier and his father walking by outside and rushed out to meet them. "Excuse me, sir," he called. They both turned. The waiter looked nervous but sincere. "I just wanted to say, I'm really sorry for how I acted that day. It was wrong. I've been thinking about it ever since." The old man smiled kindly. "Son, everyone makes mistakes. What matters is that you learned from it." The waiter nodded, visibly relieved. "Thank you, sir. I'll remember that." As they continued walking, the soldier glanced at his father. "You see? Even small actions can change people." His father nodded. That's how respect spreads, one person at a time. That evening, they were invited to a community gathering at the local hall. The mayor himself wanted to meet them and thank them for the message they had unknowingly shared with the world. When they arrived, the hall was filled with townspeople, families, veterans, teachers, even students who had watched the video in their classrooms. The mayor took the stage and said, "In times when the world feels divided, it's moments like these that bring people together. A simple act of courage and kindness can remind us of our shared values. Today we want to honor two men who did just that." The crowd clapped again as the old man and his son were called up. The mayor handed them a small plaque that read, "For reminding us that true honor lies not in rank or medals but in humility and respect." The old man looked down at the plaque, his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't used to praise. He had never done things for attention, only because he believed they were right. When they returned home that night, he sat quietly on the porch, watching the stars. His son joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. "It's funny," the old man said after a moment. "I spent my whole life serving quietly, thinking no one noticed. And it took one small moment in a diner for people to remember what matters most." His son smiled. "Sometimes it's not the big things that change people, Dad. It's the quiet moments." The old man nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting the faint glow of the porch light. "You're right. Respect begins in small places, a home, a classroom, a diner." They sat there in silence for a while, the sound of crickets filling the night air. For the first time in a long while, the old man felt something he hadn't felt before: peace. Not because of the attention, not because of the praise, but because he knew that kindness still existed in the world, even if people sometimes forgot. As the night grew darker, the soldier looked at his father and said softly, "You know, the world heard my words, but they saw your example. You reminded them what true strength looks like." The old man smiled gently. "Then maybe we both did something right." He leaned back, taking a slow sip of his tea, while the wind carried the faint sound of a flag flapping in the distance. The same flag he had once fought for, and the same one his son now served under. Neither of them said another word, but in that quiet moment they both knew. What had started as a simple act of standing up for respect had turned into something far bigger. It had become a lesson the world would remember. Days turned into weeks, but the story didn't fade. What happened in that small diner had become more than just a local event. It turned into a quiet movement of kindness and respect. People all around the country began sharing their own stories about veterans, their parents, and the small acts of dignity that often go unnoticed. Letters began arriving at the old man's doorstep. Some came from other veterans, others from young students who had watched the viral video in class. Many simply wanted to say thank you for reminding them that respect was something you lived, not something you demanded. One morning, the soldier found his father sitting on the porch, a small pile of envelopes beside him. He was reading one of the letters with a faint smile. "What's that one say?" the soldier asked, setting down 2 cups of coffee. The old man adjusted his glasses and read softly, "It's from a young woman whose grandfather served in the same war I did. She says after watching the video, she finally sat down with him and listened to his stories for the first time. She said it made her realize how much she didn't know about what he went to. He looked up, his eyes soft. I guess it did some good after all. It did more than that, his son said quietly. It brought people together. For a while they sat in silence, watching the morning light spread across the fields. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that comes after years of storms. The soldier couldn't help but think about everything that had happened, how one moment of disrespect had led to something so meaningful. A few weeks later, they received a call from a local school. The principal wanted to invite them to speak during an assembly for Veterans Day. At first, the old man hesitated. I'm no speaker, he said. I wouldn't know what to say. Just be yourself, his son told him. That's what people connect with. So the following Friday, they walked into the school auditorium. Rows of students sat waiting, the air filled with quiet curiosity. The principal introduced them and then handed the microphone to the old man. He stood there for a moment, his hands trembling slightly. But then he took a deep breath and began. I was just a farm boy when I joined the army. I didn't do it for medals or praise. I did it because I believed in something bigger than myself. The room was silent. Every student listened closely. He continued. Respect is not about saluting someone in uniform. It's about how you treat people every day. Your parents, your teachers, even strangers. It's about doing the right thing when no one's watching. A soft murmur spread through the room, the kind of silence filled with meaning. He smiled gently and said, The day my son stood up for me, I didn't realize people were watching. But maybe that's why it mattered. Because sometimes doing the right thing doesn't need an audience. When he finished speaking, the room filled with applause. Some students even stood up. It wasn't just out of respect for a veteran. It was out of gratitude for a lesson they wouldn't forget. After the assembly, many of the students came up to shake his hand. One boy said, My dad's a truck driver. He works hard every day, but I never really told him how much I appreciate him. I'm going to do that today. The old man smiled and said, That's the best way to show respect, to say thank you while you can. That night, as they drove home, the soldier looked at his father and said, You did great today. The old man chuckled. I just spoke from the heart. That's all anyone can do. When they reached home, they found a small box waiting on the porch. Inside was a letter from the diner owner and the staff. Along with it was a framed photograph, a picture of the old man and his son from that same day at the diner, both smiling. Underneath, the words were printed in simple letters. Thank you for reminding us what real honor looks like. The old man stared at the picture for a long time. You know, he said softly, I never wanted attention. I just wanted to live with integrity. I guess sometimes that's enough. His son smiled. It's more than enough. That evening, they sat outside again, the same spot on the porch where they often ended their days. The sky was painted in shades of orange and gold, the sun slowly dipping behind the hills. The soldier leaned back, letting out a deep breath. You think people will remember this? The old man thought for a moment before replying. They'll remember how they felt. And that's what matters. Words fade, but feelings stay. A gentle wind rustled the leaves around them. The world seemed quiet, at peace. In that stillness, the soldier realized something important. His father had never needed validation. The respect he carried came from within, from a lifetime of choices made quietly without expecting thanks. And yet, that simple dignity had changed hearts across the country. The following week, they were invited to a veterans event in another town. It wasn't grand or formal, just families gathering to honor those who had served. The old man didn't say much, but when he walked through the crowd, people recognized him. Some came forward just to shake his hand. Others simply smiled and nodded as if saying, We remember. Before they left, a young reporter asked for a final comment. Sir, she said, if there's one message you want people to take from your story, what would it be? The old man looked into the camera and said quietly, Respect is a choice. You can't force it or fake it, but when it's real, it changes everything. That short clip aired on the evening news, and once again people found themselves moved by his honesty. No anger, no speeches, just truth spoken from the heart. Months later, life slowly returned to normal. The old man went back to his simple routines, gardening, fixing small things around the house, taking walks in the park. But wherever he went, someone would recognize him and say, Thank you. He always responded the same way, with a small smile and a gentle nod. One day, as he sat with his son watching the sunset, he said softly, "I think my journey's been good. I've lived long enough to see respect return to a world that sometimes forgets it." His son turned to him and replied, "And it started with you, Dad." The old man smiled, eyes glistening in the fading light. "No, son, it started with you, standing up for what was right." They sat there quietly, side by side, the air filled with peace and pride. The flag in their yard fluttered gently in the wind, not as a symbol of division or power, but of unity and shared respect. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the soldier thought about how a single moment in a small-town diner had sparked something far greater than either of them had ever imagined. It had reminded the world that kindness never goes unnoticed, and that standing up for dignity, even in the simplest of places, could touch hearts everywhere. The old man took a deep breath and said softly, almost to himself, "You know, sometimes all it takes to change the world is one act of respect." His son nodded, smiling. "And you proved that." The two of them sat there as the evening turned to night, the porch light glowing softly behind them. It wasn't about fame or the video or the applause. It was about something much deeper, the quiet strength of love, gratitude, and honor between a father and his son. And though the world would move on, that story, their story, would stay alive in the hearts of everyone who heard it. A reminder that real respect doesn't come from power or pride, but from simple acts of kindness that echo far beyond what the eye can see.